County Planning Commission come to order, please. Ms. Martin, if you call the roll.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Rich?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Vitale? Commissioner Balance?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Unsold? Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert? Commissioner Gay?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Warren? Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Runner? Chair Houston?
Yes, ma'am. Everyone's had a chance to go over the minutes from last meeting and any changes or corrections to be made. If not, I'll ask for a motion.
Moved. Second.
Commissioner Rich?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance? Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert? Commissioner Gay?
Ma'am.
Commissioner Warren? Commissioner Madison?
Staying.
Chair Houston?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Houston, I request that you order that the record include all statutory and regulatory provisions, the commission's file for each application, and the qualifications for each staff witness. Finally, I'd request that you administer the oath to those witnesses.
Do you agree? I do. Thank you. Moving on, preliminary subdivision site development plans. Any questions? We don't. We'll move on to letters of credit and performance bonds. We have one to reduce the performance bond for construction of Stewart Farms from $1,039,000 to $397,400 from Construction Design Management LLC. Any questions on that? Not, we'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
Commissioner Rich?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert? Commissioner Gay?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Warren?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Houston?
Yes, ma'am. We have no old business, so we'll move into the public hearings. First one this evening is 2019-06 DP, Newcomb Oil Company, LLC, the Southern Partners, LLC, and Stockyards Real Estate, LLC have filed an application to amend the general development plan conditions on tracts of land containing approximately 13.2 acres located at 0 Nashville Road, 441 and 442 Bourbon Street. This property is zoned planned unit development with a general development plan. And Ms. Hurt will present that.
Thank you, Chair Houston. We had a pre-application conference on June 12th for the properties outlined in yellow. As you mentioned, they are zoned planned unit development, and they were rezoned in 2015 to the current designation. The current use of the properties includes vacant parcels up front, and then there's some multifamily uses to the rear portion of the development. The future land use designation is mixed use commercial. This designation applies to strategic areas mostly undeveloped today that are located near designated industrial parks and accessible from major transportation corridors. These areas are envisioned as a predominantly large-scale employment and business center, albeit supplemented by compatible light industrial, retail services, hotels, and where appropriate, higher density residential development. And I guess I will jump to the development plan here and just mention that the main reason for this request is due to the proposed fuel station here on this lot. They are proposing fueling for what we would classify as Class 6 vehicles and above, and those are outlined by the Federal Highway Administration. So those are vehicles with 3 axles or more. So in this case, it would be fueling for semi-trucks. And so that's considered an industrial use, which is not currently allowed by the development plan for the PUD. And so that's the main reason for this request this evening. And I will get to those changes here in just a second. But with that, I'm going to jump on to our site characteristics review. I'll just note that the proposed layout is shown for this lot here, and then these are the existing multifamily structures here, and the uses for these 2 lots are not specifically known at this time, but they would be some sort of commercial use. So they've just kind of shown some generic building footprints and parking areas there. On page 3, jumping into the site design and compatibility, I'll just touch on a couple of items here. Under building orientation, staff recommends that any new structure fronting Nashville Road be designed with the front facade oriented toward Nashville Road. The applicants did communicate to staff that the structure on this lot that they're proposing to build, that they're proposing to orient that toward Nashville Road. The building orientation for the remaining commercial lots is unknown at this time. And then under the development plan conditions, I'm going to just touch on the items they're proposing to change. Several of these are just a housekeeping item because the terms in the ordinance have changed since the original development plan was adopted, or they're just already requirements of the zoning ordinance and aren't necessary as a development plan condition. So that's what you see in number 1, 3, and 4. Those are just some housekeeping items there. And then on page 4, number 6 relates to access to the property. They've added a requirement that vehicular access to Bourbon Street be approved by the Warren County Public Works Department. Number 9 addresses the permitted uses, and you'll see the last portion there is where they are proposing to add an additional permitted use for this lot 3 here. Again, that's this lot there. That lot would have an additional permitted use of retail sales of fuel for Class 6 vehicles and above, semi-trucks, and then provided, however, that Class 6 vehicles and above may not otherwise be parked or kept on the lot. So there'd be no parking areas for semi-trucks. There wouldn't be overnight parking or anything like that. Number 10, that's just a cleanup. That's actually a typo from the first set of binding elements back in 2015. It should have referenced the northwest corner. And then 13, 14, and 15 are new. Number 15 actually deals with lot coverage. Since it's a planned unit development, you're able to set your own development standards, and this was honestly just an oversight from the first application. There was no reference to lot coverage for the development, so they've gone ahead and included that. And then I'll come back to 13 and 14 here in just a second, but you will note on page 5, section 312.8 of the zoning ordinance requires that an amendment to any development plan be approved, or shall only be approved if the amendment remains consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. And so the addition of items 13 and 14 are, I guess that's the applicant's attempt at trying to address as many of those current comprehensive plan items that we have in effect today that may not have been in play when the original development plan was amended. So number 13 deals with tree preservation, and number 14 deals with sinkholes. Also on page 5, you'll note that an amendment to a development plan shall only be approved upon a finding that there have been major changes of an economic, physical, or social nature, or that there have been developed physical conditions which would not permit development of the property in question with the development plan that is being amended. So, to address these findings, the applicants supplied a brief explanation that states that demand for fueling Class 6 trucks or higher, semi-trucks, continues to increase in this area because of new, expanded, and planned new development of industrial facilities in the South Central Industrial Park. And I will jump back to the land use map here. You'll see all of the industrial uses across the way. That's the South Central Industrial Park that is referencing. Moving on to the Focus 2030 category review, staff reviewed several items. There were a few things that we felt the Planning Commission should evaluate whether or not those are in compliance or not. The first is LU 113, which looks at compatibility. LU 2, that looks at protection of the character of the area. The Planning Commission should determine if the proposed amendment would protect the character of the area and contribute toward a balance of land uses in the vicinity. And then on page 6, LU 252, HN1, and HN 1.3 look at infill development. The Planning Commission should determine if the proposed amendment will result in a compatible infill project that preserves and enhances the character of the area. And then last, ED1, the Planning Commission should determine compliance with this item and if the proposed development will strengthen core industries and help to diversify the local economy. With that, I'm going to jump back to the points to consider on page 1. Staff has noted that the proposed amendment to the development plan remains consistent with the future land use map and also complies with the applicable criteria addressed in the site characteristics review. And then lastly, the proposed development plan amendment complies with the majority of the review criteria for site design, and compatibility of the proposed changes to the development plan should be determined by the Planning Commission. I know I went through that kind of quick, so if there's anything you have specific questions about, I'd be happy to answer those. I know the applicants are also here too, if you have questions for them. But other than that, I think I'm finished with the staff report.
Any questions from the commissioners?
You touched on this in your presentation, but I may have missed it. Why did we take out number 1? Is it just because it's a given?
It's required,
Got it.
regardless of if they want to do it or not. They don't have a choice. So,
No other questions? Thank you so much.
thank you.
Mr. Brooks?
My name's Kevin Brooks. I represent the applicants, and I cannot think of a thing to add to the report we just heard, but we are here and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Is there anyone in the audience that's opposed or has a concern about this development? Guess not. If there are no other questions, anything to add, we'll ask for a motion.
Make the motion to approve the proposed general development plan amendment, docket number 2019-6DP, based upon the testimony and documents presented in its public hearing. The proposed general development plan amendment is consistent with the adopted Focus 2030 comprehensive plan, as demonstrated by the compliance with the objectives and action terms presented in the staff report. Further, I find that there have been major changes of economic, physical, and social nature within the area of property in question, and I request that the findings of fact and recommendation include a summary of evidence and testimony presented by the witnesses at this public hearing.
Second.
Commissioner Madison,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Warren,
Ma'am.
Commissioner Gay,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Vogert, Commissioner Graham,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Clark, Commissioner Balance, Commissioner Rich,
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Houston.
Yes, ma'am. Motion passed. We'll move it forward. Thank you. Our next hearing is 2019-31Z County. Mike Jordan has filed an application to rezone a tract of land containing approximately 3.44 acres located at 161 Petit Road from agriculture to residential estate with a general development plan. And Ms. Ramsey.
Thank you, Chair Houston. We had a pre-application conference for the property you see outlined here in yellow on June 17th. As Chair Houston's already stated, that property is zoned to agriculture, has been as far back as we have records. Its current use is single-family residential. Around there you've got mostly agriculture and single-family residential with some vacant lots in there as well. Future land use map is agriculture. I'm going to talk about that more here in, well, we can talk about it more right now. The property is designated as agriculture on the flume because the property is a non-conforming agricultural parcel that is less than 5 acres in size, right at 3.44, and only one new lot is being created. In this case, the applicants are proposing to subdivide the property into 2 single-family residential lots. No flume amendment was required. The proposed RE zone is a potentially compatible zoning designation in the agricultural flume category, and may be appropriate if this body determines that the proposed development is compatible with the surrounding area. Now, on that first page of your staff report, I'm going to note there in the compatibility of surrounding development, there are limitations noted regarding the road width of Petit Road and fire protection. There are also several mature trees located on the property. There is a sinkhole occupying the majority of the portion of the property between the existing residence and Porter Pike, and there's also a portion of a sinkhole located in the northeast corner of the property along Petit Road. So I'm going to go on to page 2. Just point out a couple things. I just mentioned the width of Petit Road. That's 16 feet is the width of that. Water adequacy. The property is served by the Warren County Water District and does not have adequate water flow to meet the minimum fire protection requirements, but is exempt because only 2 total lots are proposed. I just mentioned the natural features, the trees and the sinkholes. Below that, prime farmland. The property contains a soil type that is classified as farmland of statewide importance. Below that, soil suitability. The property contains soil types that are classified as somewhat limited and very limited regarding soil suitability for septic tank absorption fields. The only thing I'll point out in the site characteristics review section is the cultural or historical features. The existing residence was constructed in 1948. However, it is not a locally designated site, nor is it listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So I'm going to go on to page 3, go over the development plan conditions real quickly. Number 1, subject property shall be developed with a maximum of 2 lots. Number 2, any new residence constructed shall be a minimum of 1,200 square feet. Number 3, manufactured and/or mobile homes shall be prohibited. Number 4, any new residential building shall be constructed of vinyl, brick, stone, or concrete-based siding. Foundation shall be constructed of concrete or non-plain face block. Plain face block shall be prohibited as a visible finished material. Number 5, any new residence constructed shall face Petit Road. Any new access point shall be coordinated with and approved by the Warren County Public Works Department. Number 6, any new building lot created shall obtain a site evaluation from the Barren River District Health Department for septic system approval prior to recordation of a plat. Number 7, the existing sinkhole on the property shall be undisturbed to the greatest extent possible. If disturbed, the sinkhole will be repaired prior to any construction above said sinkhole. And number 8, any existing mature trees on the property shall be preserved to the greatest extent possible. Below that, you have your Focus 2030 category review. Staff evaluated 16 items. There were 5 with which the proposal seemed to comply. And I'll go over the others that were left up to you. LU 113, dealing with compatibility with the area. On LU 2, if the proposal is a high-quality development that includes design standards tailored to preserve the character of the area. LU 214, PR 17, NCR 116, those are about the existing vegetation. The proposal generally complies with that. LU 29, this body should determine if the proposed development protects the rural character along Porter Pike and Petit Road and within the GOT community. I'll just point out CF 53, the property does not have adequate water to meet the fire control standards, but it complies since only 1 additional lot is being created. The proposal generally complies with NCR 11 and NCR 13, which deals with the sinkholes. This body should determine the compliance with NCR 241. The proposal is located on a roadway less than the 18-foot minimum standard for county roads and is served by less than 250 gallons per minute of water. So this body should determine whether or not the proposed lots will result in an increased amount of development pressure on the countryside. And the proposal may comply with HN2, 1, HN4. It's up to you all to determine if the location of the planned development is suitable for the proposed housing type and if the proposed residences are believed to enhance the array of housing options available in the area. So I'll go back to page 1, the points to consider. We've already talked about the future land use map, that no amendment was required since this was exempt. The proposed development complies with the majority of the site characteristics review criteria with the limitations noted regarding road width and fire protection. And the proposed general development plan complies with the majority of the review criteria for site design and compatibility and meets the minimum requirements in the zoning ordinance. So that is all I have, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. The applicants are here as well, and I'm sure would also be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Will there be a note on the plat that the fire department, is it going to require that for safety reasons that they be know that there's not enough fire protection on there?
Let Rachel answer that. She's got her microphone pulled down, I think, ready to.
It is required.
It is required to be on the plat?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Thank you. Does the applicant have anything to add, or? Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that is opposed to this rezone? We have no other questions, no opposition. I'll ask for a motion.
Make the motion to approve the proposed zoning map amendment together with and condition upon a general development plan docket number 2019-31Z County. Based upon the testimony and documents presented in this public hearing, the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with adopted Focus 2030 comprehensive plan as demonstrated by its compliance with the objective and actions items presented in the staff report. Therefore, the proposed zoning map amendment is in agreement with adopted comprehensive plan. Further, I request that this motion include a summary of evidence and testimony presented by the witnesses at this public hearing.
Second.
Commissioner Clark? Yes. Commissioner Rich?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Warren? Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Gay?
Ma'am.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance? Yes, ma'am. Chair Houston?
Yes, ma'am. Passed. That forward to the county. The City County Planning Commission is to hold a public hearing to consider amendments to the subdivision regulations of Warren County. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Chair Houston and Commissioners. Don't have a presentation per se, but I will switch to our website real quick here. Start with on the regulations and documents. If you just click this first sentence here, you'll be taken to the page that shows the summary that you have been handed out as part of that memo that outlines everything, as well as the option to download and look at all of the changes which are proposed in either red or green underline. If it's red, it was a change. If it was green, it was just simply moved from another section. So that's the way that is kind of organized. So per our usual public input process, we solicited comments on these proposed changes from the Home Builders Association, the Realtors Association, all of our list of surveyors, engineers. We sent it out to all of our local governments, as well as our sister agency staff, who also helps us in these reviews now. And we did that by email on June 17th, and then per the Realtors Associations, at their request, we met with them on July 8th to go over the changes. We have had no inquiries or comments on the proposed changes. We had a few tweaks requested from some of our sister agency staff, which we have made those, and those are part of what you have there. So we felt like we're ready to bring these changes to you for adoption. Most of the change here is just reworking the document for readability, flow, and hopefully better understanding. I think we felt like the existing subregs were kind of jumbled together and just had been amended over the past several decades and hadn't really been rewritten to address some of the modern things we had in there. So very few regulatory changes are proposed, but I will touch on a few things as we go through these. So I'm just looking through page 2 of the memo here. Really, there weren't any major changes to Article 3. Again, it was kind of reworked to clarify and hopefully simplify procedures of submitting a plat versus submitting construction plans. That was some of that information that was jumbled together, and it was hard to know what applied to construction plans and what applied to a subdivision plat. So we have taken those out and separated those into chapters, and then with that kind of separated those things out, eliminated a lot of duplicative language, and moved things around to match that. Couple things on Article 3, page 9, notifications. Notifications, we're going to shift those to the Planning Commission website. And if you click on Development Review on the Planning Commission website, warrenpc.org, we've added not only site development plans, but subdivision plats to the top of that page, as you see there. So generally by every Friday for subdivision plats, everything we got in that week, we will post on the website now, and you can click on those and you will get those preliminary plats. A copy of those will load, and you can review those. And then same with site development plans, but those are more on a continual basis. As they're approved, those are uploaded on a generally a weekly basis as well. So we're going to move those notifications there, and eventually we will cease advertising those in the daily news that we currently do. The Kentucky Revised Statutes, our governing chapter, KRS 100, does not require plats to be advertised. So that is something we are going to eliminate. We feel like that'll save us a couple of days to a week in the overall review time and kind of help us optimize that review process. Article 3, page 16 to 17, we've talked a bit about this as the Planning Commission, just clarifying the language on performance bonds, and we're going to tie them to the same time frame as the construction contracts. That's to help with default language and projects that go into default, so those two time frames will match and we won't have to worry about a contract expiring and a bond continuing or vice versa, so that those two will match now. It's kind of some best practices that we're mirroring from other communities. And then we're also changing language to match that process too. So it's not really a requirement change. It's just more of an administrative adjustment to make all of that language match. And it will match what we currently do for performance bonds. That language will be changed to match what we currently do for letters of credit. So we're just making sure all that language is shored up and matches now. Acceptance and maintenance of improvements. We've inserted language to clarify acceptance of that subdivision infrastructure. So at the end of construction completion, we send a letter recommending that those local government bodies accept that infrastructure, and it'll be public infrastructure. So in the past, we have allowed a sidewalk-only bond and sidewalks to do separate. That kind of ceased, and we stopped doing it, and the community still has a desire to continue that, so we're going back to a form of that. So once everything's done but sidewalks, this will allow us to go ahead and accept that subdivision, accept all the other infrastructure, but allow sidewalks to continue to be deferred under a separate bond and a separate construction contract. So we will no longer have defaults in the sense under our normal construction practices. Gets a little complicated to explain, but it's more flexible, and it will eliminate, honestly, probably about half of any defaults we may have that are due to sidewalk only bonds. And then we will work with those public work agencies to then finish sidewalks at their discretion. You got a question?
Question's always been about the sidewalks is because construction's not finished.
So the way, I guess the typical way construction practice is in this community is we'll build the roads, we'll allow houses to start getting built. Once the drainage infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, and final roadway, everything's built, then they'll go ahead and be accepted. Sidewalk construction is pushed off to the home builder and not the developer. And so the sidewalks end up getting pieced in as individual houses get built. And so oftentimes at the end of that 3-year development subdivision construction process, there's still a number of sidewalks that are yet to be built. So that's where we end up getting in default under that original contract and the original bond. So what this will allow us to do is go ahead, and if the local government's going to accept that infrastructure without those sidewalks be done, it'll be a conditional acceptance, if you will, and then the conditions are that those sidewalks will be completed. There'll be a separate cash-only bond for those sidewalks, and then it'll be at the discretion of those public works with our oversight to complete those sidewalks.
It's a question though, but
Go 10 years and not have sidewalks done.
Well, I would personally agree with you, but we have many subdivisions right now that are 5 to 10 years old that don't have sidewalks in. We'll start addressing those after we get, we're close to where we want to be on our defaults now, and we'll go back and start addressing that. But ultimately, that decision will be a decision of the local governments rather than Planning Commission staff at that point. And that's been the desire expressed by the local governments. I guess I'll put it that way.
I'll add to that a little bit, if I may, from the construction perspective. The difficulty here, the easy part would be, we just build a subdivision and we put sidewalks in. Unfortunately, when you do that, we have heavy construction traffic that goes across those sidewalks and just going to tear them up. And there's been no eloquent solution that I have seen to solve that problem. And so that's why we have the circumstance that we currently have, which is occasionally we have this sawtooth-looking sidewalk configuration until construction is completed. So let's assume for a moment that we have a vacant lot that has stayed vacant for 10 years. That sidewalk is also not completed. And it's the vacant lots that cause the sidewalk to be incomplete because the requirement is that they complete the sidewalks at the time of construction so that we don't have sidewalks that are crumbled and inferior at the end of the day. If there was a way to make that process work better, and plus let's assume that you've got to connect to sewer, for example, and the sewer tap is right there where the sidewalk goes. Now you got to dig through the sidewalk in order to connect your tap. So it's kind of a ticklish problem. I commend the staff. They've probably found the best solution that I've heard thus far. At least this gets us to accepting the subdivision, and then we set the sidewalk issue aside and bond it separately, correct? Correct. Now we can move the process, and we don't have these, we're not chasing these default issues.
Yeah, and so another piece where that's flexible to add to that. So let's say we're building a decent-sized subdivision. We may have $1 million bond, for example, to cover that entire development. We don't go below 20% of that for contingency at any given time. So the flexibility is at the end of that 3 years, then that will allow that release of that and then go down to maybe as little as $10,000, is making sure that, of course, sufficiently covers the sidewalks that are left. And so that's a much better mechanism to handle it. Back to your question, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the city will no longer accept developments unless the sidewalks are complete now. That's probably about a year, maybe 2 years old that they've made that decision. On residential subdivisions, they will no longer accept any infrastructure until the sidewalk's done. So they're essentially forcing the sidewalks to be done in that 3-year period. Difficulty comes in larger commercial developments where sidewalks are to be constructed. Some of those may set 10 years or so before anything's built. And of course, the larger commercial construction has even more heavy vehicles go over it. So this will really add flexibility there. The county, again, is more flexible on what they do. However, I think, just fair warning to whoever's watching, we will have a cycle of probably asking those sidewalks to be completed regardless, because again, we have some subdivisions out there that's 10 years old that still do not have sidewalks in, and that's, I guess, trying to find that balance between the construction concerns and then the majority of residents who live there and already moved in who have disconnected sidewalks is not really fair either. So we're taking that balance. Most of them, yes. Most all of them do. All of them still have the requirement to, but yes, we have a majority that if you looked at our bond list and you see projects in default, we've been significantly reducing that, especially this year, but I would say at least half of those are sidewalk only bonds. Yes, so what the mechanism will be now is everything, whether your performance bond letter or letter of credit, the other form is cash, the end of that 3-year construction contract, which can be extended if there's reason, and we have done that, then they automatically get converted to cash. And so we have cash money that we hold in a construction account that we can compel, if need be, the rest of those be put in. And if they aren't, then we will do what we need to do and take their money and build their sidewalks for them, and we won't be cheaper than what they can do it for, so, because we'll have to hire, bid, and do all of that stuff, so. So we have.
So Ben, it's your thought that you will, let's say, put on notice residential subdivisions that there's now going to be a reasonable time frame to build those out.
So what we do on that side, we approximately 3 months before it's time for a bond to be expired, a construction contract that will be expired, we send a letter to the bonding company, the developer, and anybody else associated with the development saying, in 3 months, we need to either get to a point where we can get it accepted, or we will have to, convert it to cash and do that. So, and then we'll work with them on schedules. Sometimes those, if it's scheduled to expire in the middle of January, for example, they may have some asphalt surface to put down. Well, the asphalt plant's closed, so we might give that person more time. But if it's just other things like cleaning up basins or that type of thing, they need to get on that, and we'll do that. So, a minimum, you get at least a 3 months out, and then we send it at 2 months, and then at 1 month, and then at 2 weeks. And then if we don't get any response, we call that bond, and the bank brings us cash.
So let's consider the situation, or the circumstance where the subdivision is complete and it's acceptable. And now we're going to split this bond, if you will, or get a separate bond just for the sidewalks. Now, once we get to that, what's the reasonable time frame for that, for those sidewalks to go in? Is that something we're going?
It would be up to the Public Works and or the governmental bodies. We'll work with them, but generally 1 year increments, 2 years is what we're thinking. And we'll, at some point you have to have discretion, right? You have to have discretion as staff. So right now we're building like crazy in this community. Most subdivisions are getting done in 2 to 3 years, so there's maybe not a big reason to extend those much longer beyond that. And if there is, we don't do that. But in slower times, that might need to be 3 or 4 years. So we'll work on that. The other thing we're encouraging the developers to do is when you sign a contract with the home builder, then you need that they are putting in that contract that the home builder has to put the sidewalk in within that 3 year time period, regardless of whether a home's built on there or not.
I think most builders are going to understand that. The harder part is going to be, let's say Rachel buys a lot and she's buying it because prices are escalating, but they're not ready to build yet. And so it's an individual that owns that lot, and they tend to hold on to those a little bit longer before they're ready to build. They're planning, whatever it is. And so I think it's important for us to try to give that information to that buyer and let them know that there's the expectation, even though you're not planning to build, you could have to put a sidewalk in and then tear it up if you need to.
Ultimately, that responsibility is from the developer to the home builder to that owner. The Planning Commission cannot manage the 4,000 residential units that we've approved over the past 3 years or so. We can't manage 4,000 individual lots. So that's why it's written the way it is. It's ultimately that developer's responsibility after that 3 year or whatever that new conditional contract will be to pass that on.
Okay, so the developer would need to convey that information to the buyer.
That's correct.
Because in many cases, the builder won't be in the loop until that homeowner selects the builder.
That's correct. And there's many different, you presented one scenario. The harder scenario is Rachel then buys 2 lots, builds on one of them, and then is just holding the other one.
Because they want the extra space.
The home is only being built on there, so the home builder only builds the sidewalk on that lot and not the vacant lot.
Agreed.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Most of the rest of the changes, again, are Article 4 is now dedicated only to the subdivision platting process. So when you're dividing land and creating that plat, Article 5 is now to the subdivision plans or construction plans requirements. So separating those two out was a big chore. And then Article 6 is now design and improvement standards. Couples changes to note there. We did specify types of storm pipe allowed. That is basically the practice that both the city and county public works currently use, so we're just putting that in there for clarity. And then we are upping the minimum slope for those pipes, the storm pipes to be installed, to 0.8%. The minimum slope is 0.5%, and most people use GPS and other tools to put those in. And, you know, water needs to flow downhill, and 0.5% slope is pretty shallow. So we're upping that to 8%, hoping that with air, you know, we would probably still accept 5, but we go out and we actually verify, use our video pipe crawler to video all the pipes now before they're accepted, and we just want to make sure water flows downhill like it's supposed to and goes where it needs to go. So that's that slight change there. Another small thing was adding the environmental note on curb inlets, saying basically it's don't dump stuff here. It's you know, this flows into our cave system or to the river. It's just the little fish symbol, and basically says that that's an environmental consideration. Something that's currently already being done. And then we had to eliminate the use of cardinal directions at the beginning or end of street names due to a next-gen 911. So 911, the next-gen stuff means they'll start being able to take texts and videos from cell phones. So I guess the software that they use to process those addresses when they come in, if there's that cardinal direction, like North Sunrise Drive or, you know, something like that, they have to take those out. So we will stop accepting those as appropriate road names.
Not Cub Inlet?
Yes, it would. I'm sorry
should
for
be
my
curb.
error. Uh-huh.
I couldn't figure out what that was.
Yep, that would be my mistake. The pavement catalog, which is Appendix F, and this is the last page, just to let you know that we are listening to input. We have added a classification of neighborhood collector in our street design requirements, and that gives an alternative between a local street and a minor collector. And it has to do with structural numbers and pavement thicknesses and or the amount of rock you use when constructing a street. So this allows an alternative to beef up the street beyond what our minimum amount is, but not go so much as high as a minor collector was. So that gives a little more flexibility and hopefully helps keep costs down in instances where that applies. And then we made a small change with crushed stone base versus DGA as part of those requirements, and pretty much only using DGA now, which is pretty much the practice that both city and county require now. However, we still will consider crushed stone base on a case-by-case basis, and the reason for that is it has to do with the site that crushed stone base comes from. How good was that rock to begin with? Is it really crumbly rock, if you will, and doesn't have much structure to it, or is it really hard chert or limestone or something like that? And so that gives some flexibility to make those decisions on site, and we will still allow that on a case-by-case basis. And then the last thing I'll mention is just Appendix G, the bonding policy, the performance bond template, and construction contracts. Basically, we just created those to provide templates or examples as a reference. A lot of times a bank will ask, or an insurance company asks, what are your bonding requirements, if they don't do them very often. So now we'll just be able to have that to give them, and it could be as simple as they put it on their letterhead and sign it, and we'll accept that. And so we get that request a lot, so that's what that is. And then just adding the checklist. So that's pretty much all I have. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. Again, this is the whole document with all the changes, if anybody wants to see the original. And then this doesn't have the appendix, but this is with the changes accepted, and we did it both ways because it gets pretty confusing as you move stuff around. So be happy to answer any questions. If not, I don't think there's any public here, but we might ask for the record, and if no other comments or changes are requested, then I would ask that you pass these proposed changes to the subregs as they're submitted.
One last question. I'm sorry
Yes,
to
sir.
ask so many questions regarding the sidewalks, because that's the one we're going to get so
Sure.
often. Let's assume for a moment that we've got the subdivision accepted and we've got this separate bond for the sidewalks. Now we have to call the bond. We've got the individual homeowner that we described. Who are we requiring to put that sidewalk in? The homeowner?
Developer.
Or the developer? Okay, very good.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That is the developer's cash, because
so-
we've now converted it to cash. So we have a minimum, we don't take less than $10,000. And so we'll have at least that amount in the bank as liquid cash, that if we have to, we will
So-
use that. But I'll just tell you, we try really, really hard not to ever have to do that, just because.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make sure I understood. So essentially, if the developer incurs that cost, it's going to be up to them to somehow try to recoup that cost.
That's right. So and that's the only way we can do it, because we got to have that one bond. So that developer, that's where we pass the buck, if you will. So as that passes on to an eventual property owner, then ultimately we have to go back to the developer, because we can't manage all of those individual bonds.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Rachel, you're off the hook. If there are no other questions, Matt? Yes?
Thank you again for such a good job. You guys have just really turned everything around, and it's a very proud day that these have gone through this well, through the public hearings and everything. And just want to commend the staff again for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Second.
That was actually in the form of a motion.
It wasn't.
Okay.
I was just agreeing with her.
Oh, okay.
I'll make the
Thank
motion that staff has done a good job and that we should pass these subdivision regulation changes as presented, and any little changes be updated, and we're good to go.
Second. Is that better, Jessica? Okay.
Commissioner Rich? Commissioner Balance? Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Vokert?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Gay?
Ma'am.
Commissioner Warren?
Ma'am.
Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Houston?
Yes, ma'am. Anyone have any new business?
Be real quick. So I'll just let you know, GIS technician position that we just advertised, we got 29 applicants, which is really good for that type of specialized position. So we're real happy with that. So we'll start interviews here within the next week or so on those. A couple of things coming up that will probably start getting some airtime, or certainly some discussion. We're going to have the Airbnb short-term rental discussion at some point as a community. Those numbers keep going up and up. I think the last quick count we had about 190 listings in this county for Airbnbs. And if I had to take a wild guess, I would say maybe a quarter at best have actual approval to do them. And we are starting to get more and more complaints through our office. So we're going to start a process and get with our building code officials and our business license folks and tourism, and start discussing how we want to handle those as a community. For some, yeah, and it's kind of it's for some. It's just time we need to look at that stuff. So we'll start that discussion. We'll bring some stuff to you on that at some point when we're ready. And then sign regulations, temporary signs specifically. We've mentioned that to you before. We've talked about that, but we are starting to move forward with that in conjunction with the city. and draft, we'll have a draft of those ready within a little bit to start shopping around and discussing, but you may start hearing things about that, but that's all I got.
That's all we have. We're adjourned.